Good evening. Welcome to the first of a new season of events from Westminster Libraries. Today I'm very pleased to introduce film historian José Arroyo, who's going to talk to us about Burt Lancaster. José is, when he's not lecturing at Warwick, he has a very extensive series of podcasts. Eavesdropping at the Movies is one of his. I believe that's now up to episode 280. He's also podcasting on the Egyptian director Youssef Chahine. When he's not podcasting, he has an excellent blog called Notes on Film. And when he's not doing that, he's writing for various periodicals and also, as you're going to discover, researching Burt Lancaster. So over to you, José.
Yes, well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining me today. Well, my only goal today is basically to introduce people who might not know of Burt Lancaster to his career, and also it's a vast career. There are basically too many areas to go to in any depth, but I want to kind of give an overview and indicate areas of real interest. This all came about for me personally in two ways. I came across this really superb book by Kate Buford called Burt Lancaster, An American Life. And it is indeed an extraordinary life, a much more extraordinary life than I thought. And then in conversations with friends, you realize that even though Burt Lancaster is ranked in the American Film Institute as, 19th, of top stars of American classic cinema, what he once meant, how his image circulated, what he signified, has kind of been lost. Yeah. So what I did after reading this really superb book, and then kind of in the first stages of lockdown in March, I made it a project of just seeing all of Burt Lancaster's films in chronological order, and it was really, a fantastic, a fascinating project, really. So I just want to convey some of that, my own enthusiasm for Burt Lancaster and what he represented, and I thought what he represented, particularly at this moment, is actually kind of really significant because it's not just an American life. It is very much an American life. It's difficult to kind of imagine this, say, in Spain, where I'm originally from. But it's an admirable American life. Yeah, it's kind of, it's a life led in relation to purpose, in relation to a social good, in relation to activism and self-expression and freedom. Yeah, and kind of the combination of all of these things. So I just kind of, want to indicate that and tease that out. The career is too rich to be comprehensive on. So I just want to touch today on some areas. I want to talk about Burt Lancaster as a noir hero of post-war cinema, partly because it lasted very little. It only lasted 2 years. Yeah, yet actually it's almost one can't think of noir without thinking of Lancaster. I also want to think about kind of, this aiming for quality, yeah, which is also kind of an attempt to be a force for good in the culture. There is very little junk in Burt Lancaster's career, yeah, and actually there's a lot of striving, which I will talk about a little bit as well. Aside from being one of the great superstars of the post-war period, yeah. And basically he had hits that made the top 10 in the culture from 1946 to 1970, yeah, and continued having a starring career after that. It's really a very rich and diverse career. But he was also arguably the foremost independent producer of the post-war era in America. Yeah, Kate Buford talks about talking to Neil Gabler, the historian, who wrote a book called The Jews That Built Hollywood. And he was saying, if you really want to understand post-war American cinema, kind of trace Burt Lancaster's career within that. So I want to touch on that for a little bit as well. The image that you see at the center of it is an image from Kiss the Blood Off My Hands. And I suppose the other reason that I want to, the other issue I want to raise is that, you know, Burt Lancaster is one of the few actors of this post-war period who unabashedly, you know, shows his body in film after film after film. Now, in ways that are sometimes excused by violence, but not always. And I also want to talk about this idea of, you know, of having a conscience of, you know, Burt Lancaster saw cinema as kind of America's national theater, a kind of a venue or an avenue in which, you know, all the major ideas of the day were discussed, and he certainly kind of made films in that way. So I'll touch on that a little bit as well. It's important when thinking about Lancaster to kind of situate him, you know, within his peers, And I was thinking about this a little bit because it's actually kind of not as easy as it seems to think, well, who were his peers? Some seem very straightforward, right? Robert Mitchum and Kirk Douglas and Charlton Heston, you know, they all appeared in this post-war period. But for example, Charlton Heston made his first film, at the same time as Marlon Brando, Dark City and The Men. William Holden, who you see at the bottom on the right, you know, he'd been a star in films since the late 30s, but was much younger than Burt Lancaster. But he only became a star in the 1950s. So kind of give me a little bit of room, a little bit of leeway here, right? Whilst also reminding ourselves, you know, that the top stars of that immediate post-war period continue to be, you know, Spencer Tracy and Clark Gable and Gary Cooper and Bing Crosby, right? Kind of, you know, these things are very, very difficult to kind of just fix. There's you know, something comes on, something is the dominant, kind of something remains. So it's always kind of a bit in flux. But roughly, you know, throughout the 1950s, the kind of late 40s and 1950s, these are the faces that one associates with American cinema. Okay, I'm going to backtrack a little bit and talk about the circus, I suppose. But I also want to touch a little bit on Burt Lancaster's background, just very briefly. It's important that he's a New Yorker. You hear New York in his voice constantly. He never tries to change it. He never tries to hide it. Kind of, you know, he was an East Harlem boy, and you could hear that accent throughout. It's very significant that he was a WASP, a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, in a culture of immigrants in which that carried with it a certain power and prestige. He finished high school and he started off at NYU. That was kind of significant. Also, his family owned his own home. So even though he lived, you know, in a kind of an immigrant neighborhood, kind of, he was within, you know, a substratum of society. He was nevertheless kind of top ranking. And, you know, that's kind of very interesting in terms of, you know, how he saw himself and his career, because, you know, there was very definite sense of outsiderness. So it's important to touch on a few things. So Lancaster was called a settlement kid. So the Union settlement, a kind of, you know, a system of aiding disadvantaged kids that came out of a Protestant ethos, you know, but then kind of, you know, became open to anyone, is, you know, they had theater labs and they had gyms, and, you know, it was a way of keeping kids off the street, is one of the things that Lancaster always said that it shaped his life, you know. So that's kind of one thing that I want to touch on. It kind of developed his acrobatic skills, and it's one of the things that helped shape him in such a way that he ran off to join the circus. So the second element that I want to touch as just background is that he's a real Depression kid. Yeah. So, you know, he was born in 1913. The Depression started in 1929. You know, it reached its peak in 1933 when he was only 20. Yeah. So Burt Lancaster is a New York working class kid who actually had access to all of the Roosevelt New Deal, who was always grateful for it, who was always pro-union, who, you know, was part of the Works Project administration. Yeah, he got money for that. He was also part of the Federal Theater Project. Yeah, so there's a sense in which kind of, you know, people think, oh, you know, Burt Lancaster, you know, became an actor by accident. Well, it's not quite true. He actually had a lot of theater experience, yeah, from the Union settlement and from all the make-work projects that the Rooseveltian New Deal kind of brought about. Nonetheless, he did join the circus. So in his late teens, he became very close friends with Nico Cucci, who became Nick Cravat. They started off an act. You see here, you know, pictures of a very young Burt Lancaster with actually his bill photos, yeah, which would advertise his act. Now, I just kind of, I don't want to do too much of this aspect of his career, except, you know, that it shaped what we associate with Burt Lancaster, which is, you know, this, you know, this magnificent body, this amazing grace in movement, kind of, you know, this great acrobatic skill and athleticism. Yeah, and it's something that would become an inherent part of, you know, his star persona, yeah, from about 1950. So Burt Lancaster is also, you know, of that generation who, after living through the Great Depression, running off, joining the circus, you know, it's who he says it's a life he loved. Then he went off to war, yeah, from Casablanca through North Africa onto Italy, right? He returned, and then, you know, it's almost like the Lana Turner Schwartz story, yeah, that, you know, he went to see his girlfriend, who he would later marry, Norma, and an agent saw him in a lift, yeah, and, you know, from that cast him in the theater, in a play, and from that, you know, in the audience of that play that only ran 2 weeks, you know, there was Hal Wallace, who offered him a film contract. So that's kind of, you know, in a nutshell, the fairy tale, the story, and it's not incorrect, except, you know, there is a lot more to that. You know, by this point, Burt Lancaster was a performer in the circus, which is also something that, you know, he always carried with him. So, you know, he says that his great influence was really Douglas Fairbanks, watching him in silent films and watching his athleticism and his, kind of, you know, the way he leapt and moved and so on was a great thrill. But the other kind of great influence was James Cagney. And he shares with James Cagney that idea of performing for the audience, of keeping always the audience in mind. So there's a sense in which whenever you see Burt Lancaster, you are seeing kind of, you know, a performer who has the audience in mind, who almost kind of bows or, kind of holds a pause or holds his body in a particular way, so that the audience might see and understand. I'll talk about it later, but, you know, he also brings up kind of very interesting questions of what film acting is, because for Burt Lancaster, it wasn't just a losing oneself in a character or expressing complexity of emotion. It was all of that, but it was also motion, so he was, you know, one of the few performers who would practice with props or a fall, yeah, 50 times until he got it right, yeah, because actually that fall was not just a plot point, it was also expressing, yeah, kind of, you know, feeling through, yeah, his physical movement. Something that I think, you know, he's not been credited with enough. Burt Lancaster's career is extraordinary, I think, for two reasons. One, he became a star quite late. Yeah, he was 33 years old when he made his first film. And that first film was an enormous success, as you can see. This is the Winter Garden Theater in New York, massive, I think 3,000-seater. And this is the poster for The Killers that kind of wrapped itself around the building. It was an enormous success, both critically and at the box office, and it made of Lancaster an immediate star, cosmopolitan writing. You know, that there had never been an ascendancy like that in films since Lana Turner or Clark Gable. It was a kind of comparable to that. In fact, you know, he became a star much quicker than either of them, in fact. So I want to show you what's called a pechacucha. Yeah. So, you know, in kind of video graphic culture now, you know, there are these exercises where you take a film and you kind of reduce it, yeah, to 1 minute. So these are kind of, I think, 10 shots of 6 seconds. And I want to show it to you. Yeah, so this is The Killers. And then I'm going to kind of point out to various elements, yeah, that kind of convey in his first film what would become a core of his persona, yeah, until the early 1950s, and that would then change and develop and so on, but that would become kind of embedded somehow, and are particularly important to the noir films that he did in the immediate post-war period. So here we go.
Oh, thank you very much. Right then, I knew the boat had sailed. She's gone. Mister, don't! Please, mister. Oh, if you did, you'd never see the face of God. You'd burn in hell to the end of time.
I want you to do something for me. Your name.
Oops. Okay. Okay.
Okay, sorry for the interruption. I'll get that back in just a moment.
It is. So bear with us for one moment.
Okay, you've almost got it there. If you just want to go to the slideshow tab.
Yeah. Wait a second. Yeah. And play from current slide.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry.
Just shows us live. We put these things in every time to just show it's live.
All right. So I wanted to show you that little film again, but I think I better not risk it. So I just want to point out a few things. That very first shot, yeah, with Burt Lancaster in his undershirt, leaning towards the camera, yeah, that's the first image of Burt Lancaster that we see on screen, yeah. So it's an extraordinary image, and you know, in the film begins. It's based on a Hemingway short story, and it begins with a man, the Swede, yeah, who's tired of running. he knows he's done something bad and he's just waiting to die, right? And the reason why he's waiting to die is because he did something he shouldn't have, right? And what he shouldn't have done is really fall in love with this woman, yeah? And you have images of him in prison, right? And obviously him as a boxer, right? So these are images that are kind of, you know, connote or relate to other images in the culture. Yeah, the kind of, you know, the boxer is really kind of images of working class men, kind of, you know, putting their bodies on the line, right? Often to achieve the American dream, which kind of never comes, right? So, you know, at the end, you know, what they end up is with their bodies destroyed in one way or another. Even if, as you might remember from Raging Bull, just bloated and so on, yeah. But they're always stories of capitalism, of kind of working class men trying to make it with a system that's stacked against them, right? So kind of that's one of the things, you know, that Burt Lancaster represented in this period, yeah, a kind of, you know, a good working class New Yorker, yeah, kind of often, you know, trying to do good with the whole system stacked against him, and a man who's been away. So I just kind of want to mention early, you know, some of his early films, because, you know, prison is something that recurs again in Brute Force, another film he did for Mark Hellinger, the producer, and again another enormous hit. He made Sorry Wrong Number for Hal Wallis with Barbara Stanwyck, and there he played the villain. Yeah, it's a role that he had to argue for. Yeah, kind of, you know, the murderous husband. Yeah, this woman falls in love, you know, with him because he's so good looking and thinks she can buy him, right? Yeah. This is a scene where Barbara Stanwyck kind of falls in love with him, yeah? And you can see how he's lit. Yeah, I put it as a GIF so that you can see where the light falls on his face, yeah? Kind of, you know, the forehead, the eyes, the lips, yeah? And you're meant to be looking at him with the same kind of appreciation, you know, that Barbara Stanwyck does, yeah? She will buy him and then he will try and kill her, yeah? Another film, another noir of this period, a very fascinating one, is by Robert Siodmak, and it's called Criss Cross. And it's about another man who loves a woman so much that, you know, she dumps him, he goes off to forget her. As soon as he returns to town, the first thing he sees is her, and, you know, he's kind of looking out for her, right? And kind of, you know, the life unravels, he goes into crime, and it has this fantastic kind of Liebestod ending where they both kind of die at the end, spoiler, of the film, yeah.
Great pleasure in presenting to you the greatest sharpshooter to ever pull the trigger, Buffalo Burt.
Yeah. The reason why I mention this is because in a very short period of time, in a period of 2 years, his persona had become so solidified that it could be kidded, right? So what I'm about to show you is a clip from a film called Variety Girl from 1948. And the persona was already so solidified. Yeah, the Variety Girl is one of those all-star films that, you know, all the studios used to do, where they would put all of their performers in skits. Yeah, kind of, you know, you think of MGM doing the Ziegfeld Follies and so on. Well, this is Paramount's attempt to do the same, because Hal Wallis worked through Paramount. Yeah, so even though Burt Lancaster's contract was with Hal Wallis, he made a lot of films, you know, through Paramount. So this is Lancaster with Elizabeth Scott in one of those skits from an all-star compilation film just 2 years after he made his debut in cinema. Yeah, so this is how quickly, you know, he became a star, and how quickly the image of him, you know, as a rough gangster had solidified.
Lancaster and his beautiful partner, Elizabeth Cactus Scott. Buffalo Bert will now perform for you the most daring feat of marksmanship ever attempted with firearms. With one bullet and one bullet only, he will ignite a match, which in turn will light a cigarette held between the soft, luscious lips of yon ravishingly beautiful hunk of femininity.
Stop breathing.
Who's breathing?
I must request complete silence while this most dangerous feat is being performed. And on the next platform, ladies and gentlemen.
All right. Lancaster made several films with Elizabeth Scott. She's often treated much better than she was in the clip that you just saw. I Walk Alone, where you can see Kirk Douglas in a supporting role, and Desert Fury. These were all hits, yeah. Not as great as The Killers, which was a bit of a phenomenon, yeah, but very considerable hits. Now, what distinguished Lancaster is that 2 years after his film debut, he became a film producer. Yeah. So Kiss the Blood Off My Hands, another noir, this one with Joan Fontaine, who you can see is top billed, was Lancaster's first film as a producer. So that was done by Norma Productions, which was named after his wife. He then had another company, which was Hulbert, which was he was contracted with Warner Brothers. And then Hetch Lancaster, which produced The Crimson Pirate, Come Back Little Sheba, you know, lots of successes. And Hetch Hill Lancaster, which did Trapeze, but actually had a slate of, you know, I think it was 14 films, of which the first 12 were successes, right? So, yeah, kind of building on this immediate post-war, you know, career, very intense and quick. He built an enormous producing career that started off with a partnership with his agent, and then began to include Jim Hill, screenwriter, later on in the 1950s. And, you know, through these production entities, which were really kind of, you know, a mini studio at their peak. They released through United Artists, and they were so important, you know, that they had special distribution deals and everything. And they didn't just produce Burt Lancaster films, but also won the Oscar for producing Mardi with Ernest Borgnine and Betsy Blair. Okay. Now, I want to show you that little clip because, you know, that acrobatic grace of movement is, you know, one of the great pleasures of watching Burt Lancaster. Yeah, kids or people who were kids in the 50s and 60s and 70s, where these films would show on television, you know, it's one of the things that they most associate, yeah, with Burt Lancaster. So The Flesh and the Arrow, Jacques Tourneur's wonderful film, yeah, which is an adventure film, and it involves lots of daring do and acrobatics, and, you know, and sword play and so on, and especially The Crimson Pirate, of which this is a tiny clip. So that was with Nick Cravat, and so it's just kind of almost innocent, joyous, kind of fun, yeah. And it's physical fun, yeah. It's a kind of a fun in the acrobatics, in the leaping and the jumping and the hiding and the outsmarting, yeah, of kind of the villains. It's kind of, you know, very good-natured, great fun. It's also quite spectacular, yeah, as a production. And these were enormous hits that actually, yeah, carried a kind of a cultural memory. They were embedded, in the cultural memory for a very, very long time, and arguably something, you know, like the Crimson Pirate influenced, you know, Pirates of the Caribbean and really all the pirate films that came subsequently. With his production company, he also produced like some of the great landmark successes of the 1950s, which he both starred in and produced. So this is Trapeze, but he also did other films like Vera Cruz, Gunfight at the OK Corral. These were just kind of enormous successes in different genres. And one of the things that Burt Lancaster built into his career from the very beginning was an attempt to build a career in which he gave people what they wanted, but also tried to persuade people to want something else or to want something better, or to kind of join him halfway into a process of thinking about the world that they lived in. And one of the things that Burt Lancaster did throughout was the sense of stretching himself, of aiming for a kind of equality cinema. And I can think of no other actor, right, who tried as hard, right? I can think of no other actor who essayed all the great writers of his day and beyond, and often at a sacrifice, that he had to convince people to let him do it, or that he had to kind of finance himself or produce kind of these works himself. So the first of these was, you know, Arthur Miller's production of All My Sons, which again, Burt Lancaster had to fight to be in that film. And then he also did William Inge. You can see him here with Shirley Booth, who'd made a big success in Come Back Little Sheba on Broadway, but in which, you know, he took on the role of a much older alcoholic. Yeah, he played like a rundown elderly alcoholic in the film. Then, of course, he did Tennessee Williams, the Rose Tattoo, in which I personally think, you know, he's magnificent. Now, you know, cinephiles will associate Sweet Smell of Success, you know, as an Alexander McKendrick noir, but really it's written by Clifford Odets, which was another great writer of the day who worked in the group theater, you know, in the late 30s, you know, at that moment where Lancaster was involved in the theater, the Federal Theater Project and the WPA. And, you know, he essayed not only the great writers, the great American writers of the day, but also, you know, he produced and took a role in Terence Rattigan's Separate Tables and Shaw's The Devil's Disciple. Kind of, and most of these were successes, many of them modest successes, you know, but he managed to kind of bring the great writers of the day, onto, you know, America's National Theater, which was the movies, you know, and kind of get the ideas discussed insofar as he was able to do so. Some of the big landmark successes of the day were produced by others. So, for example, I think arguably what most people associate Lancaster with is this scene with Deborah Carr. Okay. Right. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you okay. If you just want to go back to the slide that you left off at, that will be fine.
Yes, I don't know why.
It's all looking good now. We just need to get back to the right.
Okay. So this is From Here to Eternity. Okay, for some reason, it won't let us play that.
I think you might have to zip past that one because hopefully people are familiar with it, though it's lovely to see it again.
Okay, so let's, We begin again. Slideshow. Okay, well, I'm sorry that you missed that very famous scene with Burt Lancaster and Deborah Kerr kissing on the beach as the tide washes over their bodies, you know, and which ends with Deborah Kerr saying, "Oh, I've never felt anything like this before." So, but you know, it's an iconic moment in American cinema. It's one of the things that kind of most people associate with Burt Lancaster's career, and again, very significant because, I mean, it's his body that's on display, but the whole scene is really kind of a vehicle for desire, yeah, and emotion. So I just kind of wanted to signal something that I won't mention very much, but so in between, you know, these quality projects with, you know, Burt Lancaster, you know, making a film with a best-selling novel, in, you know, the film that constituted Frank Sinatra's comeback, co-starring, you know, Montgomery Clift and Deborah Kerr, and winning Academy Awards for Sinatra and Donna Reed. He was also kind of doing a lot of westerns. He was a great western hero, something that he's not often associated with, but he made westerns throughout his career. And here I have just two examples. Vera Cruz, significant because he played the stereotypical villain, yeah, to Gary Cooper's hero, and relishing every moment of it, and wearing black throughout, and kind of, you know, putting himself in the flow of the carnivalesque, the out there, yeah, the circus acrobat kind of waiting for applause. He relished that, and that is one of the things that we associate with him. And again, in Gunfight at the OK Corral. Now, I want to touch also on this element of, you know, this kind of I think what can only be called a social conscience. So, you know, one of the things that Burt Lancaster tried to do was kind of shape how subaltern, underprivileged, oppressed peoples in the United States were treated, right? So he made Jim Thorpe All-American, which was about a Native person, kind of, you know, going to the Olympics. And he did Apache, an enormous success, one of the most popular films of its year, by Robert Aldrich, in which is really kind of about genocide, right? Except, of course, you know, American cinema at the time could only go so far. So it ends with a kind of a rapprochement in which, you know, he's allowed to survive in his cottage with his wife, you know, and he becomes a farmer, right? But that doesn't erase all that you've seen beforehand, yeah, and kind of, you know, whilst we might not look askance, you know, kind of minimize the contribution that these films made today, they were, I would argue, very significant in their time. And this idea of, you know, who is an American, yeah, kind of, and, you know, who is oppressed, it kind of continues throughout. So, you know, in this aspect of Native American people, you know, he not only did Jim Thorpe, big success, Apache, an even bigger one, but also films like John Huston's The Unforgiven, where Audrey Hepburn plays the mixed race person, and her race, you know, is what constitutes the drama of the film. So throughout the 1950s and 60s, he alternated these big spectacle films that were very popular, you know, some of them very light, like His Majesty O'Keeffe or things like that, with, you know, Broadway adaptations of the great authors of the day, or, yeah, kind of the great issues of the day. So the film that won him an Oscar was Elmer Gantry, which you see here on the right, it's a film about evangelism, yeah, and in many ways the danger, you know, of the increasing popularity of tent evangelicals, kind of trying to manipulate people and being hypocritical and so on. So he won the Oscar for that. But there were others. So, you know, he did a film about juvenile delinquency and the young savages, yeah, and of course, kind of prison conditions and The Birdman of Alcatraz, yeah, and, you know, Judgment at Nuremberg, the Nazi trials, right? These were all kind of big prestige films of, you know, the big issues of the day. So, you know, A Child is Waiting with Judy Garland is, you know, about children with learning difficulties. And 7 Days in May is a political film about an attempted incipient fascism in the United States, which, you know, he would come to again. And these issues were not covered only in the prestige films that he made, but also became kind of, you know, the subject matter of, you know, of the genre films that he made. So you can see here in The Scalp Hunters with Ossie Davis, right, where kind of, you know, race is one of the, and slavery is, you know, one of the main kind of plots of the film. So aside from that, Lancaster was someone who kind of took chances with the roles he played, who was not afraid of having people laughing at him by doing Inge and Williams and so on. Yeah, but he also became, you know, a star, an American star, who essayed European art cinema, most famously with Luchino Visconti's great masterpiece, The Leopard, in which, you know, he gives one of his greatest performances as the Prince of Salinas. Yeah, so the Union settlement Protestant of Irish descent, raised in Harlem, yeah, becomes, you know, the Prince of Salina. He took great chances. Yeah, in the conversation piece, he plays like a repressed or not so repressed homosexual, kind of, who falls for Helmut Berger. So it's an extraordinary career that lasted, right, until almost the moment he died. So, you know, who else of that period gets a 1980s action spectacle blockbuster built around their personas? You know, this is Tough Guys from 1986, right? And it was a hit, not a huge hit, but a hit, right? Which is extraordinary. And he continued doing that and supporting ideas, and, you know, in the various places, including here in Local Hero, you know, kind of, you know, again, you know, a great British classic, which you know, kind of was made largely on the back of his name and the financing that his name could produce. So I want to end just with a little clip from the middle period of his career. Yeah, which is about kind of 3 minutes long, and it's kind of a compilation of tiny clips about how he was perceived within the films. Yeah, so he was not someone that men identified with in the late 40s, early 50s, you know, and that kind of women desired, but actually that desire was built into the fabric of the films themselves. So I hope it the clip doesn't dissolve and vanish. But here we go.
Remember me?
Mm-hmm. You're the man girls whistle at.
Okay, for some reason it's stopped playing. So I'm just going to wrap up and say, I hope I've made a good case, you know, for why Burt Lancaster's career deserves a kind of a revisit. Yeah, he was a kind of a preeminent noir hero of his time. He was also a key to unraveling the production, distribution, and exhibition of American cinema in its post-war period. He was an actor who was very daring and took all kinds of chances. And actually, the films that he was criticized for, you know, one of the things that I noticed kind of, you know, going through them in chronological order is that he's amazingly good. It's almost kind of hard now to imagine, you know, why people made fun of the chances he took. He's really very, very good in all of these films, I would argue. And then, of course, what I haven't touched on is this idea of a social conscience. He was a political actor. He was in the committee for the First Amendment. He signed the letter, you know, to get rid of the House of Un-American Activities. He paid a price for that. Yeah, so actually his passport was not renewed, and kind of the problem came about when, you know, he tried to make Vera Cruz in Mexico and wasn't given a passport. So he did have to sign a paper saying he wasn't a communist in order to go to Paris and do Trapeze, but he didn't name names and he wasn't called. And then he fought all the other struggles, the American kind of, you know, civil liberties, the ACLU struggles of the 1960s. Yeah, so here is an actor who not only strove for a lot of quality, who was amazingly beautiful and graceful, I think still the person who best moves in cinema, and who appreciates the value of movement in cinema better than any other. But someone who kind of constantly put both his money and his reputation and his career on the line, who made kind of conscious choices, you know, that were driven by a kind of altruism, yeah, by a kind of a sincerity, I suppose, yeah, you know, by an attempt to build a better world. So I will leave you with that for now, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Well, thanks very much. That was brilliant. And I think we've all got a really great overview about how he is more than just muscles and teeth. We've got quite a few questions. Please carry on posting questions because we've got a bit of time. Just one thing to say, if anyone has to leave early and their question hasn't been answered, this is being recorded. You can just go in using the same link that you used and you can watch it all over again. Okay, so we've got a few questions. Well, I'm going to blend in some of them. Someone anonymous has asked what you consider Bert's best film. And Pamela has said, because I know you've watched so much, what's your favourite Lancaster performance? So your favourite performance, and do you think he had any particular co-star he worked well with? And also, one more, just to make it slightly more complicated. Mike Samuel has said, what do you reckon his most underrated performance is?
I think, you know, my favourite performance of his is in Conversation Piece, yeah, the Luchino Visconti film. In which he plays, you know, this married professor who falls for Helmut Berger, and you see him kind of crumple up inside. I also think he's magnificent in Bernardo Bertolucci's Novecento, you know, 1900, where he plays, you know, this rambunctious elderly aristocrat, completely unconscious of the power he wields over other people, particularly servants. Again, you know, incredibly a lack of vanity, yeah, in his playing. So I suppose I love those performances. But actually, I just love watching him in The Flame and the Arrow and The Crimson Pirate. I just love watching him because he moves so beautifully and he moves so well. And I actually think that, you know, this is in a way at a crux. So, you know, on the one hand, you could be very superficial and say, oh, muscles and teeth, right? But on the other hand, kind of, what is film acting? Yeah, what is it constituted of, right? And, you know, and how important is movement in relation to expression, yeah, and the control that an actor wields over that? I actually think that those are, in a way, serious issues, yeah, that kind of Lancaster embodies. And I also think, in spite of my love for Mitchum, Robert Mitchum, for example, and Bogart, I think nobody articulates, you know, the noir hero better than he does. You get a sense from him of, you know, this man who's just come from war, right, who's imprisoned by the past, who's driven by desire, but with everything kind of stacked, you know, against him, you know, and who ends up in jail or dead after suffering, you know, from a post-traumatic stress syndrome in various ways. I think nobody, you know, exhibits that better in the run of films that he did, you know, in those immediate first 2 or 3 years with cinema. Now, I'm not sure I've answered any of your questions, but perhaps.
Hamlet also asks if there was any particular co-star you think he worked well with any particular co-star.
Well, I mean, he was a team with Kirk Douglas, right? So, yeah, they made many films together. And for those of you who are curious, there's a fantastic clip on YouTube of them singing and dancing together, which is just a joy to watch. It's I'm Glad Not to Be Nominated is the name of the song. And they do an old soft shoe and sing, yeah, and kind of perform to an audience of nominees, which includes Brando and so on. It's absolutely lovely and magical. So he was his most common co-star. He holds his own really beautifully with Katharine Hepburn in I now forget the name of the film. I'm thinking Summertime, but I know it's not.
The Rainmaker.
So The Rainmaker, that's right. You know, and he's very much worth watching in that because he is her equal, yeah, which is not the way that he is generally perceived. And they're wonderful together.
Mike Samuel also asks, did his celebrity travel abroad?
Yes. I mean, you know, this was a period where to be an American star was to be a world star. And actually, there's a wonderful moment in Bellissima, the Visconti film with Anna Magnani, yeah, where they live overlooking a neighborhood cinema, yeah, which is just a sheet, yeah, with a projector, but with hundreds of people watching. And of course, you know, kind of what makes her swoon is realizing that what she's hearing is Burt Lancaster, right? And then she looks, right? So yes, he was a world star, an international star.
Isfan has asked, do you think there's any contemporary actors who have a similar career path to him?
Yes, I mean, you know, I would argue that somebody like Brad Pitt has tried to do that, yeah. Though of course, I also think that kind of, I'm not sure how you could compare the intensity and kind of stardom, yeah, of that generation of actors, because, you know, in 1946, when Burt Lancaster did The Killers, you know, television didn't exist yet, right? Kind of everyone went to the pictures. The films were circulated internationally. People had a very intense relationship with these huge images, yeah, kind of dream images, or, you know, kind of, I mean, people also associated a kind of a religious kind of reverence for them, really. So a little religion, a little sex, I suppose. But yeah, so I'm not sure, you know, that in Brad Pitt's world, you know, which was always competing with television, at least, and all the magazines and all the other media, where that kind of intense relationship, yeah, with audiences could exist to the same degree. But you can see in Brad Pitt's filmography, yeah, how many films he's tried to make about the great social issues of the day, or about conversation pieces, or about films that, you know, aim to get people to talk about America.
Helen Palmer and Phil both say that you haven't said anything about The Swimmer.
I haven't said anything about The Swimmer, and really that is just because, you know, his career is extraordinary. I mean, there's lots of films, you know, that I haven't mentioned, but I should have perhaps kind of, you know, at least mention The Swimmer, because, you know, it's one of the films that he is most often associated with nowadays, right? It was a big flop in its day. It's based on the John Cheever story. Joan Rivers has a small part in it, but it is this magnificent film about the loss and betrayal of the American dream, yeah, with a Burt Lancaster in his 50s swimming from pool to pool around Westchester country, a very wealthy, affluent country in New England. And of course, you know, it is about the dissolution or the disappointments of the American dream. And Lancaster in his 50s, you know, has a nude scene in a film that is from 67, 68, I think, yeah, which is also kind of quite extraordinary. So yes, I mean, a film recently re-released in a very good copy on Blu-ray, and very much worth seeking. An American art film, really.
Yeah, Helen also asks about Sweet Smell of Success, and can you say anything about his role as producer and his decision to play such an evil character? And tied in with that, we've got someone who's saying dumbass question, but there's no such thing as a dumb question, as we know. What's the difference between a producer and a director?
Oh my God, okay.
Maybe a short answer to that one.
A producer is one who brings in all of the elements and is you know, so who brings together the writer, the star, who looks after the financing and the distribution, yeah, who kind of, yeah, makes the film happen, yeah, or makes the film possible. And the director is one who coordinates all those different elements, yeah, in an expressive way, or to express, or to dramatize. Does that make sense to whoever?
It makes sense to me. Hopefully it makes sense to Anonymous. So just another one about behind the scenes. Someone has said, Simone has said it's been suggested that he and Kirk Douglas were not easy to work with. Do you know anything about that?
Yes, I do. I mean, you know, Lancaster was considered to have a hair-triggered temper. Yeah, so he was a very loyal man. Yeah, he kind of, you know, he was friends with all the people he went to high school with, and you know, he had very solid, lifelong community around him. He wasn't a Hollywood person, but he was thought of as someone you didn't want to cross, right? Though, you know, I always take that with a grain of salt, because of course, you know, everything that we know about Hollywood in this production era is about, you know, kind of people cheating and backstabbing and wanting to rob you, right? And, you know, so his response is no different than someone like Sean Connery's, who had every film and every producer he worked with audited over and over and over again. Yeah. So, so yeah, it's that world, you know, so kind of what incited it, who knows? But the thing is that he was an immensely powerful man. So Sidney Pollack writes about, you know, how even in his 50s, he, you know, so one of the things that I really love about him is that he was both free, yeah, he went and joined the circus, right? But also he was very disciplined, yeah? To be an acrobat in the circus is like a ballet dancer. You've got to do it every day, right? And you've got to be disciplined about doing your exercises and so on, which meant, you know, that throughout his career, yeah, he was in great shape and he was very strong. He was very powerful, right? Just physically, right? And he was very tall and very big, yeah? So he was a daunting, threatening presence when crossed, yeah? And he played it, yeah? He kind of, he knew how to use the power he had to do all of the films that he did in the ways that he did them. So, yeah, people were scared of him, but also, you know, it depends on who you talk to. People speak of him with great love. Well.
Yes, on the fitness thing, there's a documentary about him on Amazon Prime, which has footage of him going jogging with Nick Cravat in the 70s. They were still meeting up and going jogging together.
Oh yes, I mean they were lifelong friends. They remained lifelong friends. Yeah.
Someone, Phil, has said, comment really, and that people might be interested in. Did you know that Tony Curtis has a small role as a dancer in Criss Cross? Tony Curtis, of course, went on to star in Sweet Smell of Success. Neil Jackson, I'm particularly fascinated by Lancaster's career in the 70s. What's your view on how he adapted his political position and applied the gradual aging process to films like Alzheimer's Raid, Twilight's Last Gleaming, and Go Tell the Spartans?
I think he's wonderful. And actually, you know, particularly Alzheimer's Raid. In fact, I was very tempted to do a video essay of just his face, you know, close-up of his face, you know, from Vengeance Valley, which was his first Western, you know, through to his last, right? I mean, he's somebody who I can't think of, you know, and with all due respect to Brando, and I love Brando, and I think Brando is capable of expressing kind of a greater complexity and also surprising one, you know, in particular ways. I don't think anyone else has a filmography that Burt Lancaster does. And actually, those films that you mentioned, Neil, Twilight's Last Gleaming, fantastic, right? Ulzana's Raid, superb. I mean, you know, I think these are great classic films, you know, of the last stages of his career. Yeah, so yeah, I ended where I did, but I think kind of, you know, there's more to explore there. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to do 2 more questions. Coleridge has said, thanks for your talk. You mentioned your high opinion of Lancaster's performances in Visconti films. As Italian films are often dubbed, does this have any impact on how we understand his performances? Do we miss his voice? Does it foreground the visible aspects of his performance style?
Well, I mean, I suppose it depends on how you watch it, right? Because, I mean, I have seen it in both the English version and the Italian version, and it's a tragedy about the Leopard, you know, because actually Burt Lancaster was himself in charge of the dubbing into English, and obviously did his best, but the film was a total failure in America, and considered one of the great films in Italy. And now there's a consensus around that. I mean, I must say it kind of, I grew up in Spain watching dubbed films, right? And the thing is that there were particular actors who were associated with playing particular American stars. And so you associate their voices. My feeling is, you know, that an actor's voice is essential, and I always seek it out, yeah, when possible. Of course, in films like The Leopard, you're always weighing different options because, you know, to hear Burt Lancaster's voice means you're not hearing Alain Delon's, right? Or any of the other Claudia Cardinale, right? So kind of there's always a trade-off. However, you know, in something like The Leopard, there's no need for it because it's so beautiful. You can watch it over and over again, and you can watch it in the different versions. So something is lost, something is gained.
Okay, and the last question, and I really apologise to the questioner because I've been going through deleting them as I asked, and I did accidentally delete it. So someone said that they really like Atlantic City, but nobody ever discusses it, and you didn't discuss it. So discuss Atlantic City.
You know, it's an oversight because. So I wanted to do this whole section of this talk on just, you know, the amazing European auteurs he worked with, right? Some in America, like Louis Malle, but, you know, also Liliana Cavani, right? Lapelle is, I think, marvelous as well. But of course, you know, arguably his role in Atlantic City, which kind of harks back, you know, both to his roots and also to the noir period. You know, he plays kind of, you know, well, someone who really wanted to be a gangster, but, you know, just as a minor numbers racket kind of person. He's fantastic. That actually is, you know, one of the really great performances in American cinema, and a truly great film. So the only reason I didn't mention it is because actually his career is so incredibly rich and so much worth revisiting that inevitably, you know, in a 40-minute talk, a lot of things will fall away. So I'm sorry that that was one of them. I love it.
Well, thank you. I know a lot of us are going to be going and seeking out some of Burt Lancaster's films right away. Just to say, if you enjoyed the talk, your link will enable you to watch it again. So feel free to share the link with your friends if you think anyone else would have enjoyed it. We have plenty more talks coming up. We've got next week, we have Mark Glancy talking about Alfred Hitchcock and Cary Grant. We've got talks coming up on Audrey Hepburn, on Doris Day, and others that I'm sorry I've forgotten now. But we have plenty more talks coming up. So please keep an eye on our Eventbrite page. And I just want to say thank you very much to José Arroyo for a really enjoyable talk. And good night, everybody.
All right, bye-bye.